Mu. Pagara. Mu. 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 O Toki Pona. Wawa! Ale o kama. Everybody, come to the classroom. If you would like to not be in the classroom, that's also valid. That's perfectly fine. There's no problem with that. All right, give me just a moment to situate my notes. And then we will get started. Let's see. All right, that should be good. All right. Tokia yanaleo, mi yan kekansan, mi wile pana e sona pitoki pona. Hey everyone, I'm Greg Dan 3, and today I want to tell you about Toki Pona. So we're going to be covering the word li today, but a good bit more than that. If you were here for the last lesson, we tried to do a broad overview of absolutely everything you would need at a bare minimum to just get started in Toki Pona. Like the stuff you just can't avoid if you want to have a basic conversation. But now we're going to do a bit more of a dive into one particular piece of grammar, and don't worry, we'll try to make it more useful broadly than that along the way. So the star of this lesson is the grammatical particle li. Here we go. And its symbol is just a little right-pointing arrowhead, or however you'd like to imagine it. The idea is it points from something like Jan, who is doing something, to whatever action they are taking. Let's say Pali. So Jan, li, Pali. You'll recall that sentences with me and Sina work very, very similarly, but of course, no li. You could think, in a sense, that me and Sina are already doing that for you. But for everyone and everything else, you gotta have li. And there are literally only the two exceptions, me and Sina. So we're going to be focusing on li throughout this lesson, but I should clarify that, well, I don't need to clarify that. We can just continue. So let me get ahead of my notes. I described here this basic idea of a Toki Pona sentence. We have the subject, and we have the predicate, technical term. It's either a verb or an adjective. And that's actually an important detail because you might also recall modifiers. That is, what if we had just Jan, Pali? And the reason I'm stopping here to go on about modifiers is because li and modifiers have a very close relationship. As a matter of fact, all of Toki Pona's grammar does, because modifiers are kind of a generic version of everything else in the grammar. That's a bit of a high concept idea, but what you need to worry about here is this. Jan li Pali basically means a person is working or creating. Jan Pali is a subject, a noun, that describes a person who is working, or in some contexts, maybe a person who has been created, right? But either way, these two ideas are, in a lot of ways, interchangeable. This makes it way, way easier to figure out what's going on with a modifier. Because, of course, basically every modifier stands in for some other piece of grammar. How about a simpler example? So if we have yan, li, tawa, yan is person, tawa is move, and li says that something is doing an action, right? Or maybe being described some way. So if we have yan, li, tawa, that's a person is moving, or a person is walking, or maybe dancing, right? Any form of movement. But you could then say something like yan tawa li musi. Yan tawa li musi. So take a look at what we've done here. This initial sentence, yan li tawa, introduces a very, generic idea, let's say. We're just describing one subject and one predicate in the simplest way possible. There's somebody, and they're moving. However they're moving, they're moving. But now that we've referenced them, yan li tawa, we can actually add on more detail. We can refer back to that same person by just clarifying which person we're referring to. Yan tawa. Again, this is that idea of the modifier kind of performing the same role as li, doing the same thing of carrying some information about a person, or really anything in particular. So if yan li tawa, then there is also some yan tawa. That is to say, if somebody's moving, there is also a moving person. And that's the exact same idea in English. Of course, English's grammar is fiendishly complex by comparison. But the idea is that you can use what somebody is doing, yan li tawa, to also describe them, yan tawa. And here, of course, yan tawa li musi. We have a further idea. The moving person is funny, or entertaining, or amused. So I really want to hammer in this idea of li, and again, other grammar too, but we're not there yet, but li especially being very closely related to, if not interchangeable with, modifiers. As a matter of fact, a lot of the time, if you make a sentence with lots of modifiers, it's usually easier, both for yourself and for your listener, to just break it up with lots of li. Like, if I wanted to describe, let's say, a very large old plant, right? Well, I could just say it as one big phrase. So we have kasi suli pi tenpo pini weka. So kasi is plant, and suli is large or important. So kasi suli together, large plant, like a tree. Then we have pi here, which we've gone over before, but to summarize quickly, it takes the next few modifiers up until there's another piece of grammar or another p, usually, and bunches them up into one thing. So p is bunching up tenpo pini weka. So what is tenpo pini weka? That's tenpo is time, pini is ended or past or gone. Well, excuse me, not gone, ended or past. And weka is gone or removed or very, very distant. So tenpo pini weka is altogether a time that has ended that is also very far away, or the distant past. But this really, really large noun phrase, it's a lot to grab onto. Now, you can certainly say things like this. It makes perfect sense, but you can make it easier to follow by making it a sentence. So let's say kasi li suli. Just as a starting point, and I'm running out of space here, so I should perhaps clear this and start again with the top, but we'll worry about that in a second. Kasi li suli, right? Again, this is that idea of we have a modifier, and it's just kind of performing the role of describing something, which li can do as well. Kasi suli is describing the same thing as kasi li suli, but kasi li suli is a full sentence. Much easier to figure out what's going on in that context. But what about the rest of this? Pi tenpo pini weka. Well, this is where we start to introduce another piece of grammar that helps you understand what's going on. In this case, we're going to need a preposition. Now, I'm not going to introduce too many of these for this lesson, but there are a couple of very important ones. In this case, we have tan. Oops, I need to back up a little bit. My eraser is not working. Lovely. Li tan tenpo pini weka. All right, so now there's two things going on that I need to quickly go over. We saw how li can describe things, or it can refer to actions being taken. So here we have kasi li suli at the very start, our big plant that we're just saying is big. Then we have another li. You can use basically as many li as you want. Obviously, don't go too crazy, because having lots of li is just as bad as having a really big, complicated noun phrase. You want more sentences if you really want more and more li. However, using two is no problem, and does help break up your idea. Kasi li suli, that's our first predicate. We know the plant is big. Li tan tenpo pini weka. Now, we remember tenpo pini weka. That is a distant ended time, a long time ago, right? Tan refers to cause or origin. It often is used to refer to, like, what caused something, in the sense of the word because, right? But in this case, it's referring to tan in the context of time, or kind of where this thing began. What is its origin, right? That's a little high concept, but it's basically the word from, if we're going to translate it into English. Li tan, and then tan being a preposition, as I noted before, it contains everything following it. Tenpo pini weka. So, kasi li suli, the plant is big. Kasi li tan, the plant is from tenpo pini weka, a long time ago. Now, think about where we began. We wanted to describe a plant from a long time ago, and we had this big noun phrase, kasi suli pi tenpo pini weka. That, again, is really complicated to follow. Now, it does look smaller than the sentence we made, but the sentence we made is giving just enough more information, just enough more grounding to really make it flow. Because every li is giving you one structured piece of information. And further, the tan that we basically have to use, it's giving us more information about what tenpo pini weka means in this context. So this is the power of li, just in general. It gives you the ability to structure things, quite literally. It is, in a sense, the absolute backbone of Toki Pona sentences. It lets you describe things and say what things are being done. Wait, what's up? Wait, what happened? Oh dear. I have no idea what just happened. Hello. That was weird. I want y'all to know that on my end, y'all all started freaking out about me being disconnected. Like, I saw that. I was still standing here and y'all were going, "Oh no, Kekkon-san died!" Alright. Reset my camera so I have that properly set up for the stream. Bap. There we go. Alright. No. The YouTube stream stays. It's just I was in first person view for a little bit. Yeah, we have realigned it, it looks like. Perfect. Okay. So I believe I was harping on about this relationship between big noun phrases and lead that makes it more simple to follow what's going on. So that means it is a great time to move on and give lots of examples of li. So we're going to clear all that. I'm going to push forward in my notes. All right. And we're just going to go over some sentences. And again, look more at that relationship between li and modifiers. So let's say we have kulupu, li. Sui, li. Kama, sona. Kulupu, li, sui, li, kama, sona. So we're introducing another idea here, which I will get to shortly. But looking at this at the very start, kulupu, that is a group or community, or maybe collection. Li sui, sui is cute or sweet, both in the sense of being cute and in the sense of being sugary. Li kama sona. Kama is to arrive, for something to be invited, maybe. In this context, it refers to something changing state, maybe growing, or it can be shrinking, or it can be like learning in this context, because the next word is sona. Sona is knowledge or understanding. So I mentioned before that li helps us break things up in a convenient way. It encapsulates all the different little ideas in the sentence so that they're easier to parse on their own. So we can look at each one independently. Kulupu li sui, well, that is, the group is sweet or cute. And then, going back to the start, we have kulupu, but we have this other li, kulupu li kama sona. That is, the group arrives at, or begins to, or becomes learning, knowing. There's a question in the crowd. Is there, I can't quite read it behind the seat. Is that, not really. You can use as many li as you want, in the sense that, like, physically you can fit as many as you want, but there are practical limits, right? Like in English, we call that a run-on sentence, when you just keep saying words and saying words. Even if it's technically grammatical the whole way, it can be pretty hard to understand what you mean, right? So in Toki Pona, we encourage broadly shorter sentences, right? I would limit yourself to like 2 or 3 li as like a very generic rule, right? You could break that. You could have any number of reasons to break that rule. But if you're like putting 40 plus words in one sentence, you're going to have problems, right? I wouldn't worry so much about how much is technically possible. Instead, worry about, am I structuring what I'm saying in a way so that other people understand me? Does that make sense? Sweet. Right, so kulupu li sui li kamasona. Now, kulupu li sui we get, right? And we can see the relationship back to just kulupu sui, right? A cute group. But what about kulupu li kamasona? Well, kama is another piece of grammar. It's doing a special thing here in this sentence. Normally, when you start li, the next thing after it is a verb or a description unto itself. But in this context, this thing is called a preverb, and it changes the way you interpret the verb. Now, don't get caught up on the grammar per se. A lot of times, it just kind of means there's this new way to think about the verb, and you just need to be aware of that. It sounds a little weird thinking about it that way, but it really is true. Kulupu li, well, the second li, kulupu li sona is kind of the core idea going on here. But kama indicates that something is changing or becoming true. So kama sona, that's now starting to learn or becoming learned. The process of learning, right? And you can still describe this with modifiers, although the grammar does change a bit. But again, we're not worried about the specifics of the grammar. The terminology is more thrown in so that if somebody says that word later, you kind of have an idea of what's going on. What we're worried about is, do you understand the sentence? Kulupu pi kama sona. So that's the that's the noun phrase that's roughly equivalent to kulupu li kama sona. Kulupu pi kama sona. Again, we're seeing that relationship between li and modifiers, but here again, there's more information that is offered by the sentence than is offered by the modifiers. Again, really big deal. P, terrible word. If you think you're using it, stop using it. I'm joking. P is fine. But don't overdo it. Basically everything. Don't overdo it. If you think, I should really use P 4 times, stop. Cool. So now we have our kulupu sui, and we have our kulupu pi kama sona. We kind of know what things are in the sentence. We know how they're being described. And so that's really it for this example. We again have this structured li, the idea that li is structuring part of our sentence for us, and that we can now use, or that we've been able to use more than one of them, and we have this extra bit of grammar in kama. So I'm going to clear that, and we're going to continue. All right, so how about something a little bit more practical? Let's look at a question that involves li. So questions obviously are outrageously important. You can't have a language without questions because there's no way to communicate perfectly. It's literally impossible. So questions are there to back you up whenever you mishear something or you're just missing some information. But what about when you're just starting out in the conversation? Well, here's one way to ask somebody, what's going on? Seme, li, lon. Seme, li, lon. Fix that one up. There we go. So we've covered seme before, but to reiterate, seme stands in for missing information when it's just sitting there in some part of speech. Some piece of the grammar, per se. So here, seme is standing in for some subject, right? It's followed directly by li, and then we have lon. Now, lon seems like a tricky one at first, but here it's actually quite simple. It's just referring to something existing. That's kind of a very broad idea, like, wow, everything exists, right? Seme li lon. What exists? But that's not really a useful way to think about it. Instead, it's really more like, what's a better way to describe that? What is here? What is happening? What is going on? It's talking about anything being present. And normally that anything being asked about is just what's something conversational, right? So when I said this is a practical type of sentence, that's because you might see it in a conversation that goes like, Toki, seme li lon. And then they could go on to describe themselves like, mi pali mute li wile lape. So let's go back over what's just happened here. We have now a conversation, 3 sentences in a row. Well, this one's not a sentence, it's actually just a phrase. Tokia just means hello, because toki, as an interjection, just kind of jumping out on its own without a sentence, that's hello. It's how you greet somebody in general. It's just an emphasis particle. It's saying you're a little excited. I'm a bit excited. Continuing, we have seme li lon. Again, that's what exists in the literal, but more like what's going on, what's happening, what exists here and now in this moment, what's in the room, right? And then this sentence over here, we'll get to that in a moment, but I'll reiterate it. Mi pali mute, li wile lape. Again, that practicality point. Seme li lon is just a really short and sweet way to ask somebody, what's going on? What are they doing? Well, not literally what are they doing, but what things exist in the sense of what is happening, right? But usually, when you have a conversation, of course, it's a back and forth, so you're going to offer up what you're working on at that moment. This sentence is a pretty simple one, but it does give us a couple more important pieces of grammar to look at. We recognize me, of course. You're talking about yourself. Pali mute. Okay, so that's our verb. Remember when I said me works a bit like li? Yeah, it's doing that. That's the first word of the sentence, and it's just me. The next thing is a verb. No li needed. Mi pali mute. That's a complete sentence. And pali, of course, is to work or create. Mute is a lot or very. It intensifies something. So this part of the sentence is mi pali mute, I work a lot. That doesn't necessarily mean to work a job. It could be working on your hobbies or doing chores or sitting down and crafting, I don't have a joke. Make something cool. Make something cool. You're just making something. Making lots of things even. But then, what's going on over here? Why is Lee here? That's a weird one. So, remember how I said you could have more than one Lee whenever the subject was something like Yan, Lee, Pali, Lee, Lape. That wasn't the example I gave before, but a very similar one. Lee is already required when you have a subject other than me or Sina. Perfectly fine. So if we put a second one on there, it just kind of connects back to the original subject, right? Here's our first connection. So we have our the rest of the sentence there. There's our second connection. So we have the rest of the sentence there. Yan li pali, yan li lape. That is, a person is working and a person is sleeping, or somebody works and then sleeps, right? But over here, we have me and then Lee. The trick here is that even though me doesn't get Lee at first, if you wanted to say more than one thing about me or Sina, you would use Lee the second time. Now, this sounds a little weird, right? Because, like, there's nothing here. There's no Lee. But if you think about it like me working like Lee does, and also standing in for the subject at the same time, well, that makes perfect sense. We have our first connection, basically to itself, and then the rest of the sentence. And then we have our second connection, and then the rest of the sentence. Mi palimute, mi wilelape. This is probably the weirdest part of Toki Pona's grammar. I wouldn't say it's the most confusing necessarily, but it's definitely one of those things where when Toki Pona was developing, when it was growing over time, this is one of those things that wasn't really decided from the very start. Instead, this is something that kind of grew out of the way Toki Pona was being used. And there wasn't always the broad agreement about how Toki Pona should work. Now, in the present day, this is pretty standard practice. It's the common way to say, that me does something else. But you'll note when I describe the sentence, the broken up version of the two sentences rather, I just used me a second time. Mi palimute. Mi wile lape. I do a lot of work, and then I wait, what's going on over here? So before I explain this sentence, quickly reiterating, if you use me and then you want to have a second description or action that me takes, well, then you just use Lee that second time around. Or you have the option of having a separate sentence entirely where you use me again. Both of these are valid. They both make perfect sense. They'll be understandable to basically everyone. But the rest of this sentence here, mi wile lape. Okay. Well, we know what me is, obviously. Wile is to want or to need. That is, if you would like to eat, you could say, mi wile moku. Let me write that one out for you. Mi wile moku. Mi wile moku. Here, well, let me back up. Wile is performing the same role as kama did before, but now, instead of it being a change in something or something beginning, it's now wanting something. Now the verb has a whole new mode attached to it. So the core of the sentence over here is mi lape. Lape is to rest, nap, sleep, relax however you need it. So, mi lape could be I take a nap, or I go to bed, or just I go on vacation. Mi lape. Mi wile lape. Lape is no longer specifically going to sleep because of wile there. Now it's that you would like to sleep, or you would like to rest, or you want it, or maybe you need it. So again, wile and the one we covered before, comma, they go right here at the beginning of the verb, and they change the mode of the verb. They make it mean some specific thing for the entire verb. You can't take it out. You can't break it up into pieces. It needs to stay with the verb because it's doing something important. It's conveying information that needs to be in that part of the grammar. Mi wile lape. I need to sleep. Oof. Right. So we've covered a lot in this section because of this little conversation piece here, but I'll quickly summarize the last couple notes of the lesson. So, in about the order I was covering them, seme li lon. Just a practical way to say, what's going on? What's happening? Backing up to the conversation itself, tokia. Toki is how you say hello. Toki. A is how you kind of indicate excitement or other kinds of emphasis. So, tokia is like an excited way to say hello. Semelelon, we got that. Then we have this person continuing the conversation by saying how they're doing, what's going on with them. Mi palimute, they've been working a lot. Li wilelape, so they want to say a second thing about themselves, and they chose to say li. Wilelape, want to sleep. They would like to sleep. Or, excuse me, in context, mi wilelape, I would like to sleep or rest. So, altogether, we have kind of how a conversation works, simplified, of course, but we have the idea of a conversation in here. We have a way to describe ourselves and the relationship Li has to that. We can say more than one Li. You can have as many as you want, but keep it practical. Keep it short and simple. And we know the relationship between Li and modifiers. How modifiers are kind of a generic version of the grammar. And the grammar, like Li, that one's conveying a more specific thing than modifiers do. That is all I had for this lesson. Thank you so much for coming and listening. Have a good one. Let me turn off that. And let me turn off the stream so I have that saved.